Have you ever noticed that every time you try to be a better person, something inside you seems to sabotage your most sincere efforts? That promise to change you made yesterday morning already seemed impossible by the afternoon, and that decision to live differently lasted less than your motivation after watching an inspirational video. Watchman Nee discovered something that most modern Christians have never fully understood. The cross was not merely a historical event that happened 2,000 years ago on a hill outside Jerusalem, but a spiritual reality so radical and transformative that when truly comprehended, completely explodes our way of living every single moment of the day. While millions of people desperately try to improve themselves through discipline, willpower, and self-help techniques, Nee revealed a forgotten truth that inverts this entire logic. The problem is not that you need to try harder, but that you are still trying with the wrong part of who you are. Most people live imprisoned in an exhausting cycle of effort and failure because they have never understood what really died on that cross, and more importantly, what resurrected in its place. Nee spent years studying the scriptures in depth, living under persecution and testing these truths in the most extreme circumstances imaginable, until he distilled an understanding of the cross that completely transforms how you face your weaknesses, your difficult relationships, your daily temptations, and even your apparent successes. What you are about to discover is not another motivational message about trying to live better, but a revelation about a death and a life that have already happened in you, waiting only for you to recognize their reality and stop living as if you were still in the same place as before. When Watchman Nee first encountered the truth about the cross, he was already a devoted Christian trying desperately to live a holy life. He prayed more, studied harder, made stronger commitments, and yet found himself repeatedly defeated by the same weaknesses. Sound familiar? What he discovered in Romans chapter 6 changed everything, not because it gave him a new technique to try, but because it revealed something that had already happened to him the moment he believed. The old man, that entire system of self-centered living inherited from Adam, did not need to be improved or disciplined into submission. It had already been broken on the cross with Christ. This was not wishful thinking or theological theory, but a spiritual fact as real as the historical crucifixion itself. Most Christians live their entire lives trying to make a broken system behave. They wake up each morning determined to control their temper, resist their impulses, and force themselves into the mold of what they think a good Christian should look like. Nee understood that this is like trying to rebuild a structure that has been demolished. The problem is not that you are not trying hard enough, but that you are trying to restore and reform something that God already declared finished. When Christ went to the cross, you were broken with him, not partially, not symbolically, but actually and completely. Your old identity, with all its compulsions, its self-centered nature, its inability to please God, was shattered with him. The difficulty is that most believers have never been told this truth clearly, or if they heard it, they treated it as beautiful poetry rather than objective reality. This is where the revolution begins. Nee taught that recognition precedes experience. You cannot experience what you do not believe has already occurred. Imagine spending years trying to pay off a debt that was already cancelled, working day and night in exhausting labor, only to discover that someone settled the entire amount on your behalf years ago. The debt is not waiting to be paid. The work is not waiting to be done. The question is whether you will accept that the transaction is complete. In the same way, the cross is not something you must repeatedly apply to yourself through spiritual effort. It is a finished work that accomplished something definitive. It broke your old life and united you with Christ in his brokenness. The moment you stop trying to break yourself and recognize that you are already broken with Him, everything shifts from struggle to rest, from effort to faith. But here is what makes this truth so difficult to grasp, and why Nee spent years teaching it with such precision. We feel very much whole in our old patterns. Our emotions rage, our desires pull, our pride rises, and our self-will demands its way. How can something be broken when it feels so intact? Nee explained this with brilliant clarity. You are no longer dealing with your old nature, but with its residual habits and the enemy's deception trying to convince you that you are still who you used to be. It is like a building that has been structurally compromised, but still stands until the final blow removes it. The foundation of the old life was shattered at the cross. What remains is not a living master, but the momentum of old patterns waiting to be displaced by new ones as you recognize your true identity in Christ. Now we must understand what replaced what was broken. This is where most teaching on the cross falls tragically short. People hear about brokenness, being broken before God, yielding in brokenness, and they assume the Christian life is primarily about negation, suppression, and constant self-denial. Nee saw through this incomplete picture to the glorious reality on the other side of brokenness, resurrection life. When Christ rose from the dead, you rose with Him. This was not a metaphor. A new life, His very life, became yours. Not an improved version of your old life, not your personality cleaned up and redirected, but an entirely different quality of life that never existed in you before. This life does not struggle to be holy, because holiness is its nature. It does not try to love because love is what it is. It does not manufacture peace because peace flows from its core. Most Christians live as if they received a manual for better living when they believed, when in reality they received a new life source. Nee illustrated this with the image of a branch grafted into a vine. The branch does not produce grapes by studying grape production techniques or by intense concentration. It produces grapes naturally because it is connected to a life that produces grapes inherently. The branch's responsibility is not production but abiding, maintaining the connection and allowing the life of the vine to flow through it unobstructed. This is precisely what Jesus meant when He said to abide in Him. You are not trying to imitate His life, you are allowing His life to express itself through you. The cross brought complete brokenness to the old life so that the new life could flow freely. This transforms how you face every single day. That difficult coworker who makes your blood boil, that family member whose behavior triggers your worst reactions, that temptation that seems to know exactly when you are most vulnerable. These are no longer tests of how strong your willpower is or how much you can suppress your true feelings. They become opportunities to practice recognition. When you feel that familiar rise of anger, impatience, or selfish desire, you do not have to enter into a wrestling match with it. Nee taught that the moment you recognize these as expressions of the old life that was broken, you can simply turn your attention to Christ within you and say, Lord, this is not me anymore. You are my life now. Live through me in this moment. This is not passive resignation but active faith, choosing to rely on His life rather than managing your own. Here is where many stumble. They try this once or twice, still feel the old reactions, and conclude it does not work. Nee spent years explaining that recognition and reckoning are not one-time events but moment-by-moment choices that become increasingly natural with practice. You are retraining your entire response system to operate from a different life source. A person who has always driven on the left side of the road does not instantly and effortlessly drive on the right side just because they moved to a different country. The legal reality changed immediately, but the habitual responses require conscious correction until the new pattern becomes natural. Similarly, you are learning to live from the reality of resurrection life, even though your old response patterns try to assert themselves. The difference is that now you are not alone in the struggle. You have a new life actively working in you, not passively waiting to be activated by your perfect performance. Let us move into the concrete reality of daily existence, where these truths either prove their power or remain as abstract theology. Nee never taught the cross as an escape from real life, but as the only way to truly engage with real life without being destroyed by it. Consider the frustrations that fill your ordinary day, the traffic that makes you late, the unexpected expense that disrupts your plans, the criticism that wounds your pride, the interruption that derails your schedule. These are not random annoyances but divine appointments where the cross becomes practical. The old life responds to these situations with irritation, anxiety, defensiveness, and control. It must have things go its way because its entire existence depends on circumstances aligning with its demands. But that life was broken. The new life in you is not dependent on circumstances because it flows from a source that transcends circumstances entirely. Watchman Nee lived through imprisonment, hardship, and eventually martyrdom for his faith. He was not teaching from theoretical speculation, but from tested reality. He discovered that the cross provides something far more valuable than comfortable circumstances. It provides freedom from the tyranny of circumstances. When someone criticizes you unjustly, the old life wants to defend itself, prove its innocence, and make sure everyone knows the truth. This is exhausting and endless because there will always be misunderstanding and unfair judgment in a fallen world. But if that self-defending life was broken on the cross, you are suddenly free. Not free from the pain of criticism, but free from the compulsion to protect an identity that no longer exists. The new life in you does not need defending because it is hidden with Christ in God, completely secure regardless of what anyone thinks or says. You can simply receive the criticism, consider if there is any truth to learn from it, and release the rest without the internal war that used to consume you. The same principle applies to every area where life presses against you. That person who repeatedly lets you down, who promises but never delivers, who takes but never gives, the old life either explodes in anger or implodes in bitterness because it keeps expecting them to change and keeps getting disappointed. Nee taught that the cross frees you to see people as they actually are without requiring them to be different for your peace to remain intact. Your emotional stability is no longer held hostage by their behavior because it flows from a different source. This does not mean you enable dysfunction or remove healthy boundaries. It means you can love them genuinely without needing them to meet your expectations, and you can make wise decisions about the relationship without the emotional charge that clouds judgment. The cross shattered the structure that tied your internal state to external performance, whether your own performance or others' performance toward you. Here is what makes this so revolutionary in daily practice. You begin to discover that most of what you called spiritual warfare was actually the old life fighting to maintain control. The enemy certainly attacks, but much of what exhausts believers is their own civil war, trying to make the old nature behave spiritually while it remains fundamentally incapable of producing spiritual life. When you recognize the old life as broken and turn your attention to the new life, a strange peace settles even in chaos. Not because the chaos disappeared, but because you are operating from a different realm. Nee described this as living from the heavenlies while walking on earth, maintaining your position in Christ even as your feet navigate difficult terrain. This is not mysticism disconnected from reality, but the most practical approach possible, because you finally stop banging your head against the immovable wall of self-effort and start drawing from an infinite supply that never runs dry. Everything we have explored leads to a liberation so complete that most Christians have never tasted it because they have never understood the cross deeply enough to enter it. Watchman Nee called this rest, but it bears little resemblance to what modern Christianity often presents as rest. This is not relaxation, not leisure, not the absence of activity or responsibility. This is rest in the deepest sense, freedom from the crushing weight of self-improvement, from the endless treadmill of trying to become what you already are in Christ, from the exhausting performance required to maintain an identity that God never asked you to construct. When Jesus said his yoke is easy and his burden is light, he was not minimizing the cost of discipleship, but revealing that the Christian life operates on an entirely different principle than religious striving. The yoke is light because you are not pulling the cart alone. His life in you does the work while you cooperate by faith. The tragedy is that millions of sincere believers live under a burden that Christ never intended them to carry. They wake up determined to read their Bible more consistently, pray more fervently, love more sacrificially, serve more generously, and by noon they have already failed 3 of these commitments and feel the familiar wave of guilt and shame. Nee exposed this as a fundamental misunderstanding of the gospel. You are not trying to live the Christian life. Christ is living his life through you as you yield to him moment by moment. The difference sounds subtle but produces radically different results. One approach ends in burnout and secret despair. The other produces genuine transformation that compounds over time because it flows from an inexhaustible source. You do not become less holy by depending on Christ instead of your own effort. You become authentically holy because true holiness can only come from his life, never from your determination. This explains why some of the most dedicated Christians are also the most depleted. They have mistaken activity for life, commitment for connection, and duty for devotion. Nee watched this pattern destroy countless believers and spent years clarifying the difference between living by principle and living by the indwelling Christ. Principles tell you what to do. Christ gives you the life to do it, and often does it through you before you even realize what is happening. You find yourself patient in a situation that would have previously triggered you, generous when your natural instinct would have been to protect, peaceful when everything in your circumstances screams for anxiety. This is not you trying really hard to act this way. This is Christ's life manifesting through you as you maintain your position in him, recognizing that the old reactive life was broken and the new responsive life is yours now. But here we must address a critical question that arises at this point. Does this mean we do nothing? Does recognizing the brokenness of the old life make us passive? Absolutely not, and Nee was emphatic about this. You are more active than ever, but now your activity flows from rest rather than striving. You cooperate with the life in you rather than trying to manufacture life through effort. Think of how your physical body works. Your heart beats without conscious effort, your lungs breathe, your cells regenerate, all without you trying to make it happen. But you still choose what to eat, when to sleep, how to move. You cooperate with life, you do not produce it. The same is true spiritually. As you recognize Christ as your life, his desires become your desires, his priorities shape your choices, his love flows through your actions, but you are fully engaged in the process, choosing moment by moment to yield to him rather than reverting to self-generated activity. This is rest that works, peace that produces brokenness that brings forth abundant life. Now we arrive at the most subtle yet powerful dimension of this truth, the aspect that ultimately determines whether the cross becomes theoretical knowledge or lived reality. Watchman Nee observed that transformation happens not in the dramatic moments we anticipate, but in the invisible shifts of daily response that accumulate into a completely different life over time. You do not wake up one morning suddenly perfected because you finally understood the cross. Instead, you begin to notice small changes. A conversation that would have angered you last month now leaves you surprisingly calm. A disappointment that would have spiraled you into despair is received with unexplainable peace. A person who previously drained you with their neediness now evokes genuine compassion instead of resentment. These are not achievements you work toward. They are evidences that a different life is expressing itself through you as you maintain your recognition of what was broken and what lives. This gradual transformation frustrates those who want instant results and dramatic before and after stories. Nee knew this frustration personally during his early years of attempting to apply spiritual principles through willpower. What he eventually discovered is that God is not interested in improving your performance, but in replacing your life source. And life, whether physical or spiritual, grows organically and often imperceptibly until one day you realize you are not the same person you were. The caterpillar does not become a butterfly through incremental improvements to its crawling technique. It undergoes a complete metamorphosis in the hidden darkness of the cocoon, and when it emerges, it is a different creature entirely. The cross is your cocoon. What went in was the old Adam life completely broken. What emerges is Christ expressing himself through you in unique ways that reflect your personality, gifts, and calling, but powered by his nature rather than yours. Here is what makes this process simultaneously frustrating and beautiful. You will still see your flaws, still encounter your weaknesses, still face situations where you respond from the old patterns. The difference is not that these moments disappear, but that they no longer define you, and increasingly they reveal themselves as relics of a broken life rather than expressions of your true identity. Nee taught that our growth in understanding the cross is largely about learning to distinguish between what is genuinely us in Christ and what is residual activity of the old nature trying to convince us it is still in charge. When you recognize anger arising, you can now say, "This is not me." The man who lives by anger was broken with Christ. Christ is my life, and his nature is love. This is not denial or repression. This is recognition and choice, refusing to give life to what God declared broken and turning your attention to what he declared alive. The final dimension of this transformation is perhaps the most unexpected. As you live from the reality of the cross, you become less concerned with your own spiritual state and more aware of Christ himself. The focus shifts from self-examination to Christ enjoyment, from monitoring your progress to simply knowing him. Nee discovered that the Christian life is not ultimately about you becoming better, but about Christ becoming more real to you, more present in your awareness, more the center of your existence. And paradoxically, as you stop obsessing over your transformation and start focusing on him, the transformation accelerates because you are finally cooperating with how spiritual life actually grows through relationship and union, not through self-improvement projects. You are being changed from glory to glory, not by trying to change yourself, but by beholding him, by maintaining that recognition moment after moment, that he is your life now, that the cross brought complete brokenness to who you were so that who he is could fully emerge, and that this reality transforms everything even when you cannot yet see all the evidence. This is the forgotten truth that changes daily life, not by addition of more religious activity, but by revelation of what already occurred when Christ went to the cross and you were included in his brokenness and his resurrection, forever freed from the old and forever joined to the new. So here we stand at the end of this journey, but perhaps for you it is only the beginning. Everything Watchman Nee discovered through years of persecution, study and divine revelation points to one inescapable reality. You have been trying to live a life that no longer exists while ignoring the life that has been yours all along. The cross did not give you a better version of yourself to work toward. It shattered the old completely so that something infinitely greater could take its place. Every frustration you have felt in your Christian walk, every repeated failure, every exhausting attempt to be holy through your own strength. These were never signs of your inadequacy, but evidence that you were trying to animate what God already declared broken. The question that remains is not whether this is true, but whether you will finally stop resisting it and let the reality of Christ as your life become the lens through which you see every moment of every day. This is not about trying harder or understanding more theology. This is about a recognition so profound that it changes how you breathe, how you respond, how you exist in a world that constantly demands you be someone you are not. The alabaster box had to break for the fragrance to fill the room. Your outer man, with all its self-protection, self-promotion, and self-reliance, must experience the same brokenness for the fragrance of Christ to touch everyone around you. Watchman Nee lived this truth in a prison cell, and you can live it in your living room, your office, your most ordinary Tuesday afternoon. The cross is not waiting for you to apply it correctly. It already accomplished everything, and now it simply waits for you to stop performing and start resting, stop trying and start abiding, stop defending a life that ended 2,000 years ago, and start living from the one who rose and will never end. If this message stirred something in you that refuses to settle, if you sense that what you heard today is not just information but an invitation to a completely different way of existing in Christ, then do not let this moment pass without marking it. Leave a comment below with the word broken, not as a confession of defeat, but as a declaration that you are ready to live from the brokenness that leads to resurrection. Share this with someone who has been exhausting themselves trying to be good enough, and if you want more truth that shatters religious performance and reveals Christ as he truly is, subscribe and join this journey toward the forgotten truths that change everything.